I'm Janet.
And I'm Roger.
Welcome to the sixth season of the Halfling and Spaceman Journeys in Active Fandom. There's so many fantastic creators out there, and they all have their own stories about their journeys to becoming the creators that they are now.
And we're here to bring you those stories and hopefully entertain and inspire you. We're excited today to be talking with Randee Dawn. She's a journalist who's also a writer, focusing on speculative fiction across the categories of science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Welcome, Randee.
So glad to be
Yay!
here. Thank you so much for
Welcome.
having me.
Well, thank you for being here, and thank you for letting us take the time to get through our never-ending technical issues.
Never ending
I
problems. Oh.
okay. No. We don't do that.
Okay, we don't do that.
We don't do that.
We're not doing that.
But it seems to be something that we say with every guest is thank you for your patience while we work through the technical issues. So, and you're in good company. So, but we do appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Let's go ahead and start with, if you would, please tell us and our audience a little bit about yourself and your background.
Sure. So, my name is Randee Dawn. I am an entertainment journalist. I've been doing that for a lot of years. I've covered film, TV, music, lifestyle, however that fits into things. I've written for places like Variety, the LA Times, the Today Show website, a bunch of other places like that. I started out doing music journalism, but then I segued into TV and film. But the dream has always been to publish my fiction. Fiction is not super remunerative, so I wanted to make sure I had a backup so that I wasn't living on the street trying to write fiction. But I've been writing fiction since I was a little kid, one way or the other, and I've always wanted to have my books published. And for various reasons, it didn't really happen until sort of a little bit later in life for me. But I had my first novel published in 2022 called Tune In Tomorrow. It is a silly and funny book about a reality TV show run by mythical creatures for mythical creatures, but starring humans. My most recent book is called The Only Song Worth Singing. That just came out in April. And it's about three guys who are best friends. They grew up in Ireland together. They are on tour in America in the 1990s for the first time. And they are chased by scary fairies who sort of turn their lives upside down. I actually have two other novels coming out this year. And we can get more into depth with that later. But one is called Leave No Trace. It is also sort of a dark fantasy. And the final one for this year is We Interrupt This Program, which will be the next book in the sort of Tune In Tomorrow universe. They're all standalones, but they were connected in sort of like a Pratchett-y Discworld way, if I may speak the name of the great man.
Oh.
So yeah, that's the basic idea behind what I do. I also have a course online called How to Be Interviewed, because as you can probably tell when you interview a lot of other folks, not everybody is comfortable being interviewed and talking about themselves and coming up with all their points. So I created a 6-part lesson that's with creative coaching services. I'm sorry, creative coaching partners, and that is available. So that's another thing that I've got on the resume.
Oh, wow. My goodness.
Halfling, this is the second journalist we've had on the air.
Just a second?
Okay. Yeah. The second whose primary career is journalism.
Okay, yeah. I guess that's true.
Who was the first? I'm just curious.
An Australian author, Tabitha Carvan, she wrote a book called This Is Not a Book About Benedict Cumberbatch. It was a really, really interesting read.
Okay, I will have to take a look for that.
Yes, and I will just say that she really gets fandom. She really does. Even
Although her true love is Benedict Cumberbatch.
As if you probably couldn't guess, you know. But but really, the title is true. It really isn't so much a book about him.
Mm-hmm.
It's but she really gets fandom. She gets our people, and it was really it was really kind of weird and sort of almost surreal talking with her about,
Mhm.
about her book, and how similar, what she was talking about was to what, to what we
Oh,
do.
Right.
Anyway, yes, check it out.
check it out,
Check it
definitely.
out.
Absolutely.
It is definitely worth reading or listening to, as we do. We listen on audiobook.
Right.
But but so you've talked already a little bit about, about the books that you've read, or written, and some of the articles and things that you do. But
Mhm.
what's your actual background in terms of, like, your education?
Well, so I grew up in Maryland.
Mhm.
I went to school at Boston University and I got a broadcast journalism degree because I thought I wanted to do broadcast. But the fact is, I really like I like the solitariness of writing. I like the one person sort of creating the whole thing. I mean, I'm not always a good group collaborator. So
Mhm.
I stuck with publications and magazines and newspapers as the main thing I wanted to do. So I got a degree from Boston University, and then was looking. I briefly had a job with an NPR radio show, but it didn't pan out in the end. And I did a lot of freelancing and a lot of temp work. And I moved to New York and did more temp work and more freelancing.
Mm.
And then I finally got my first magazine job at Soap Opera Digest. Um, so I was there for a couple of years. A lot of that backstagey stuff, going to see the actors on set and everything, that very much fueled the backstagey stuff of Tune In Tomorrow. The story in Tune In Tomorrow, originally it was supposed to be a soap opera that was run by Mythics. And when the book got picked up, my editors said, "Look, we love the book. This is great, but nobody watches soap operas. Can you make it a reality show?" And I'm like, "Well, I beg to differ, but if you'll take the book and that's all I got to do, fine." So it really was kind of like filing off some serial numbers, more or less, and that was about it. Um, so I was at Soap Opera Digest for about 5 years, and then I got hired at the Hollywood Reporter and their New York bureau. And I was there for about 5 years doing different types of articles, but not so much soap operas anymore. And yeah, when I got laid off from that in 2008, I went full time freelance and really put my head down and tried to focus more on the fiction and the books. And yeah, that pretty much leads us to where we are today. There was a brief sojourn into getting a paralegal degree because
Oh.
I was a big Law and Order fan, and I'm like, well, maybe I'm never going to get a job at a magazine. This is before Soap Opera Digest hired me, and I was like, well, maybe I should go back to law school because I really like Law and Order, which is a dumb thing. Don't let TV guide you necessarily, um, but I realized, okay, I can't afford to go whole hog on this. I don't know if I'd even pass the entrance exam for the LSAT or whatever, but I could get a paralegal degree, and I would see if it was something I liked enough to then go forward and get a 4 year or 3 year, I guess it is, to become a lawyer. And I
Mhm.
really did like it, actually. I found it really interesting. There was just something about the organized nature of law and the way you can subvert the rules and everything that really just appealed to me. But I met a woman in that class who was also doing the same course, and her brother in law was like, the bureau chief of the Hollywood Reporter, and I said I freelance, and like my life just sort of took that turn as opposed to the other turn I was trying to turn it into. And so I never used the paralegal certificate, but I did get one.
Wow. That's
That is awesome.
that's
You
a
are quite the polymath.
that's
I I think if you're interested in something, why not pursue it? Life is short. Let's pack as much as we can into it. The whole Law and Order thing actually turned into technically my first book because I paired up with another writer named Susan Green, and she and I ended up writing the unofficial Law and Order SVU unofficial companion, and it was unofficial, but Dick Wolf, who created the show, gave us access onto the set. He wrote the foreword. It was more like unofficial. We had to call it unofficial so that the NBC vice presidents and everybody wouldn't get their hands on it and make a million
right.
changes.
Mm.
So technically, that was my first book, but that's nonfiction. So
Talking about Soap Opera Digest,
mhm.
Soap operas will definitely prepare you for writing fantasy and horror. I I I can honestly admit that when I was a younger man, I used to go and have lunch with my mom every day, and my mom would be watching her soaps, and I got addicted.
Mhm.
So me and my mom would just sit there and talk about what was going on with Victor Newman. It was
Oh,
always about Victor Newman.
she was a Y&R person. I see
Yes,
it. Young
she
and the
was.
Restless. Yes.
Yes, she was, and still is, I believe.
Uh-huh.
Well, see, mine was all my children in General Hospital.
You were an
Those
ABC
those
person. It's funny.
those
People were very network oriented. So you
Right.
were
It
obviously
it
an
it
ABC
it
person.
is. Yeah. It's well, I mean, you think about it, they just follow one right after the other. And so, I was there for Susan Lucci and her, what was it? Took her 19 times at the daytime
Something
Emmys
like
to
that. Yeah.
finally get her daytime Emmy.
Hmm.
And I was like, well, it is about time because that woman, she bless her heart, and she just really acted her soul. I mean, you know, and then of course Luke and Laura on General Hospital and
Oh, yeah.
their relationship. Oh man, I am not alone when I say that I skipped class to watch their wedding.
You
I
know,
Oh,
mean,
yes.
I'm just
Yes. That
saying,
was
you know.
so many people watched that wedding.
Oh yeah,
Absolutely.
and
absolutely.
we as sci-fi fans have nothing on soap fans.
No,
They
we
have,
really
and
don't.
they have no room to talk about us
Nah.
because they have to see every episode. We're the same way with our books and series. I mean, we have
Right,
to have every book,
right.
but it's there
Yeah.
should be a little common ground.
I think there
Well,
should. I think that there's this concept of what a soap opera is, and we have in our minds this idea that it's all daytime drama stuff. And that is obviously the classic example of soap opera. But many, many shows that don't call themselves soap operas are soap operas. If you
oh
have
yeah.
a book series, a fantasy science fiction book series, and there are 10 books in that series, I'm sorry, you have fallen into a soap opera. It's just not traditional. I mean, come on, Game of Thrones is a soap opera, right? I mean, what in there does not also fit with soap opera, except that there's no hospital drama, right?
There's no evil twins.
But yes, there are the Lannisters. They are, but they don't look like each other, but they're sleeping together. Jamie and his
Uh,
sister are evil twins.
okay, I stand corrected. There are evil twins, apparently.
Okay. All right. Okay. This is where I do my job and get us back on track. Um, so talking about various fandoms, whether it's soaps or sci-fi or whatever, uh, were were you considered a nerd or a geek growing up? And if so, what types of fandoms were you really into growing up?
It's funny. I was definitely not in the popular group. I don't know if I would literally have been considered a nerd or a geek because of a certain fandom that I was into. I was just sort of a nerd and a geek because I read a lot. It was just, oh, you read a lot, you're not into partying down or being out really late or whatever. I just wanted to read. So, like, I was a
Hmm.
book nerd more than a fandom nerd per se. And when I really got into a particular fandom early on, when I was real, 11, 12, 13, 14, whatever, it was very much music related. I went from books into music 100%. I didn't read a ton of fantasy when I was much younger, and I didn't read a ton of science fiction, maybe. I think what I fell into, I kind of came in the back door through fantasy and science fiction because I was really into apocalyptic stories and dystopian stories. There wasn't a ton of it for young adults at the time, but growing up in the 80s when we really believed that we're just going to get nuked at any minute now, the missiles are going to fly, and movies like Threads or The Day After were coming out, like
Hmm.
that's kind of what hooked me. But if you get into that fandom, it's a very short walk to zombies. It's a very short walk from there to aliens. And I think that's sort of the back door I came in through, as
Yeah.
opposed to reading a lot of epic fantasy that then would make me a quote unquote nerd or geek. But I didn't have anything against people who were into that. That just wasn't my jam. So I became a real nerd or a geek for Duran Duran, for example, or just Brit pop in general.
Right.
But yes, definitely, and if not nerd and geek, then nerd and geek adjacent.
Well, there you go. Uh, all right, Spaceman.
All right. So, how long have you been writing lifestyle and entertainment articles.
Oh, okay. So the entertainment stuff, you could technically say I started doing some of it in high school because I was the features editor on the high school paper in Gaithersburg, Maryland. And I could kind of pick and choose what I wanted to put in every week when we did it. So I had friends who were doing music reviews for me. We tried to do things that were entertainment related. I just kind of got into it at that point. And then when I went to Boston University and I joined the Daily Free Press, which is the school newspaper, I also worked on the features section and did a lot of interviews and articles that way. My very first interview with a famous person for the Daily Free Press was Meatloaf. And that was
Oh
a
man.
fabulous phone call because I was supposed to call him. I was supposed to call him at his mom's house. And about 3 seconds before I placed the call, I was like, wait a minute, who am I asking for? Like, do I actually say, is Meatloaf in? Or do I say, Mr. Loaf? Or do I say, Marvin a day? Like, who am I even asking for? And it didn't matter because he picked up the phone and it wasn't even an issue. But I just had that moment of panic, and he was great. We had a great conversation. He wasn't difficult. He answered all the questions, um, and I have no complaints at all about that interview at all. And that really kind of just pointed me in the right direction. I have done quote unquote lifestyle things, but my real interest is in interviewing people because I'm super nosy and I just want to ask all the questions. And if I'm really lucky and I can throw in a question they haven't been asked 40 million times before, I'm so excited because I like to, that sort of shows off my little nerdiness about that particular interview. So yeah, I started high school, college, and then while you're in college, the music, the record labels and all that really wanted to get college people listening to specific music. So they would send you albums. They wanted you to listen to it. They wanted you to be the equivalent of an influencer, even though we didn't call it back in the day.
Mhm.
And so I started writing music reviews and sometimes doing articles. And then before I graduated, I was starting my freelance career with a legitimate paper in town called the Boston Phoenix, and just had some great pieces that were in there and continued the freelancing. So it was a slow ramp up, but that's really something I've been doing basically in one form or the other since high school. It's been a long, strange trip.
All right. Well, ask us an interview question.
Ask you an interview question.
Yes, ask
Okay.
us an interview
Sure.
question.
What made you both decide to do a podcast together? I mean, obviously you're married, but like, why do it together and why do it this way?
You're the one that told her to ask a
oh,
question.
okay. Well, we do everything together.
We do.
We do.
We really do.
We've been together for 37 years and well, actually 40 if you count the time we were dating. And I wouldn't want to be with somebody I wouldn't want to do stuff with.
That is totally fair. But what actually like made you say podcast? Because you can do everything together, right? But like who came up with the idea for the podcast and then who said, all right, I'll do that with you?
We were at RavenCon.
Oddly
Familiar venue.
enough, this was a RavenCon.
This was a RavenCon thing, and we were publishing our own little web zine, Crimson Streets, and you can kind of see the cover of issue number 1 up there on the wall.
Oh, right. Okay.
And we had breakfast with another one of the guests at the convention, and he was talking about his podcast. So on the way home, we started talking about doing our podcast. And that podcast was supposed to be about hard-boiled detective fiction.
You have
It is
clearly
not.
theory.
To sort of supplement, what we were doing with Crimson Streets. That was the
Right.
general idea.
Okay.
And that was right around the time the pandemic hit.
I was going to
Um,
say, you said this is the sixth year, sixth season, and I was working my math back. It sounds like it was right before the
yeah,
pandemic really hit.
yeah. So that sort of put a damper on some things. But if you're doing a podcast, and especially if you do it like we do, and most of it is via some sort of recording platform, you know that's not an issue. The social distancing thing is not an issue. But we bandied around several ideas trying to figure out what we wanted to do a podcast about.
Mhm.
And we said, well, what do we know? What are what do we know? Well,
And we
w-
know people.
we know people. We have been in and around fandom since both of us were in high school,
Mhm.
and in various shapes and forms. And through the various projects that we've worked on, we've developed a lot of contacts, met a lot of people, befriended a lot of people, and we thought, okay, and these are people that have really interesting stories, and wouldn't it be cool to talk to them about their stories?
And it has been.
And it has been, but the really cool thing is that they told two people, and then those people told two people, and so on and
And
so
so on
on.
and so
and
on. Yeah.
and and it turns out people like to hear about people's journeys, and they like to hear about the challenges and how they were overcome. They like to hear that it's worth it in the end. They like to hear these positive things. And we've always said we're a podcast about things that we love,
Mhm.
not things that we hate.
Yeah, love don't
Too
hate.
too many too many podcasters out there, too many talking heads out there about hating, and we don't want to do that. So that's really how we came to do it.
Okay. Well, thank you for
Long
putting out the
story.
positive vibes into the world.
Well, that transitions to the next question. What made you want to try your hand at writing fiction after writing so much nonfiction?
Well, the truth is, the fiction came first. I was
Oh.
writing fiction about my stuffed animals when I was, 7 or 8. I had a collection of stuffed animals, and they were all related or connected in one way or the other. And my brother and I would do stories just playing. But then I wanted to remember some of those stories, or I felt for some reason I wanted to write down those stories. And my dad was a pharmacist at the time, and he would bring home these flyers from the pharmacy that had blank on one side. So that was my scrap paper. And I would just start writing the stories, and I drew pictures to go with the stories. So, like, the writing fiction really was long before I did anything nonfiction related. When I was in 7th grade, I thought I was going to be a veterinarian, and I took an animal husbandry class. And there were groups of us, and we had to raise a rabbit. So, like, every 3 people had a different rabbit, and there was a special rabbit tree, and you had to go out and feed them every day and clean up after them and everything. But at the end of the semester, they said, all right, now you've got to give your rabbit a vaccine. And this is not like some anti-vax thing. I'm just saying, I couldn't physically do it. Like, I couldn't inject an animal with a needle. Like, that just kind of squeaked me out. I mean, I'm 7th grade,
Mm.
and I said, oh, I guess I can't be a veterinarian now. And I went to my mom, and I'm like, what will I do with my life? I don't know. I'm in middle school. I need to know what I'm going to do with my life. And she said, well, what do you love to do? And I said, I love to write. And I give her a lot of credit, because even though she's not in publishing per se, she must have had an instinct that writers don't get paid a lot most of the time. And she said, well, you could be a journalist. And I was like, what is a journalist? So she had to explain it to me and point out the local news anchor on TV, and that's what they do, and blah, blah, blah. So after that, I just sort of shifted course and said, all right, I will become a journalist, but I will continue writing fiction. And one day, maybe I will get some of these stories out. But I was not ready to receive criticism. I think the thing is that a lot of people will write a story, they'll show it to their mom, or they'll show it to their best friend. Your mom and your best friend will say, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. And they go, great,
Hmm.
I'm a writer. I'm now can publish this. And that is really not how the process works. You have to be able to be in a mindset where you're not too precious about your writing, and that you are willing to throw it out in the world toward people who are not invested in your emotional well-being, who you don't have to like them afterwards, but you have to respect what they have to say. And you have to be prepared to get stuff back that you may not agree with, or you think that maybe they shouldn't have said. And I was just not either mature enough or devoted enough, or however you want to put it, to really accept that criticism. But what shifted for me was when I started going to a lot of sci-fi fantasy conventions, and I met other writers who were either new or self-published, or on different parts of their journey. And I would have conversations with them, and I would feel like, okay, I can show you my work. I trust you. I know you won't, kick me in the butt, but you will still give me a fair criticism that I can work with. So it was really just baby steps. They just took me longer than maybe some people take. Cause I think when you're in your 20s, if you can accept criticism in your 20s, cool. I really was not there for a long time. And then I was really just focused on making my career work and trying to buy an apartment and just living life. And the idea, and the other part of this too, is that the internet wasn't a thing for a lot of my early years, right? So
Mhm.
we didn't have the internet. And when you wanted to try and find an agent or get something published, you had to buy a book called Writer's Market, which was about this thick. And it listed everybody in tiny, tiny print who you might possibly send something that you have written to. And by the time it comes out in print, it's already partially out of date anyway. But then you had to print your stuff up. You had to put it in an envelope. You had to get postage. If you ever wanted to hear back from me, you had to do a self-addressed stamped envelope. Like this was a financial investment. I didn't even own a printer. So when the internet came along and you could suddenly submit things as electronic documents, it just changed everything in so many ways. You could see more about the agents and what they were looking for, and you didn't have to buy this big book every year and comb through it with a fine tooth comb. You could it just made the whole submission process a lot more financially possible. And so that coincided, I think, a lot with my being able to be critiqued. But if that had not come along, who knows? I'd probably just still have a stack of stuff that never saw the light of day one way or the other. The book that just came out, The Only Song Worth Singing, I wrote that in the 1990s. Like there was an original version was from the 1990s, and I went through a couple of versions here and there. I'm like, who am I going to send it to? Send it to? And it's the book that got me my agent back in 2016. But it was already 15 years old, 15
Mhm.
no 25 years old at that point. Like it was already like it was an old book. But it was also in a specific time and place, and we tried to shop it around, and it didn't find a publisher. But then circumstances came about where I was able to find a publisher for it all later. So, it's an ongoing forever process in a lot of ways, and everybody will approach it differently, and everybody's ability to participate in the writing will be different for every person. It's not like you're a failure if you're not published by the time you're 30 or whatever, right? Like Ursula Le Guin, I think, didn't get published until her 50s or 60s. So whatever it takes for you as the writer is the path you have to go on, but it's not necessarily going to be like anybody else's.
That is so true. It really is, and that's something we consistently hear.
Mhm.
Whether it's whether it's lessons learned or your your own process. It's everybody is different, and what works for some people may not work for others. And I have this challenge, but you may have this challenge, and and there's no specific timeline, like you said. So yeah, we consistently hear that type of thing. Um, but I want to ask you about the fact that you have written, you've written short stories and then the anthologies, and then you've also written your longer novels. Do you prefer writing short form to long form in terms of your fiction?
I It's funny because it wasn't until I was much more acquainted with the whole publishing industry that I'd ever heard of authors who only wrote short fiction or only wrote long fiction or only wrote one length of things. Like for me, one of the authors that I just read compulsively was Stephen King, and he did everything. He did nonfiction, he did fiction, he did short fiction, he did novellas. Like, and we know why because now he's been so successful. They'll basically publish him writing the telephone book. But a lot of stuff that he put out there was of any length, whatever the story warrants. My natural inclination is to do a novel, but there's lots of stories, ideas that I have saved up or things I want to work on that wouldn't sustain for an entire novel. So those things are best off as short stories or novellas. And I think that I like doing all of them. It really just depends on the idea itself. Some of the short fiction that has gotten published, actually sort of riffs on some of these books that I've had sitting around a long time. The only song worth singing, like I said, was originally written in the mid '90s,
Mhm.
but I never thought it was going to get published. I'm like, okay, I tried. He got me an agent. Great. Maybe it's never going to see the light of day. But I liked the main antagonist so much that I wrote a novella of her on a different adventure, doing different things with a different band. And it turned out to be about a 15,000 word story that got published first in an outlet called Dim Shores, and then it got republished in something called Soul Scream Anthologine. And what I tell people now is, if you get that book and you like that book, if you like that novella in that anthologine, you might like the novel. And if you don't like the novella, you still have all the other stories in the anthologine.
Mhm.
But that is true for this book and for the book that's coming out in August, Leave No Trace. That's another book that has a very long history with me, but found a publisher. It's the same publisher as The Only Song Worth Singing. That one, again, I never thought it was going to get published, but there's a bunch of background stories and alternative meeting stories, and there's at least 3 or 4 stories that I was able to publish about the book or about the characters that doesn't infringe on the actual story itself. And those got into short form. So, I figure if there's something that's interesting enough about a character to do a short version or a separate story, let's do it. So
Mhm.
yeah, I know that doesn't quite answer your question. The answer is I will write whatever makes sense. But I think if you told me I could only write one thing ever again, I would probably lean toward novels.
Well, then it's a good thing you don't have to write just one type
Yes,
of thing.
exactly. We are not limited.
Uh, well, on a related note, because you do write the lifestyle and entertainment articles, and you do write the fiction as well. Of those two, do you have a preference, or do you enjoy each, equally?
I mean, the preference is definitely fiction. There's not really a question there, but that doesn't mean that the nonfiction has no value or is not interesting. Um, I love talking to people because people have, as you know, interesting stories to share. And the people I love talking to the most are the creators out there. People
Hmm.
often ask, who's your favorite actor you ever interviewed? And I'm not saying they're all boring, but if they're not the ones who are behind creating the project in some way, I'm really not as interested in talking to them. I like talking to the script writers, to the producers, to the directors. They're not quite as hemmed in by PR people telling them what they can and can't say. So I like talking to people who are actually doing creation. And the thing is, what I discovered is that those things have become the foundation for a lot of what I truly know. When people say, write what you know, well, if you're 21 or 18 or 25, you don't know a whole lot in terms of like muscle memory. But being in the entertainment industry for so long, it makes it possible for me to sort of look back at the experiences I've had doing the nonfiction and how can I process that and maybe turn it into something that's useful for a novel. So I do have something to say now. I have this make things feel like you're really there, or stuff that maybe you wouldn't know about how entertainment is created, or what's it like on the tour bus, what's it like behind the scenes of a soap opera. Those things I can put into these books because I've been there and I've seen that.
Hmm.
So without one, I don't know that Tune In Tomorrow would have happened, for example, or if it happened, it wouldn't feel very realistic, despite the fact that it's about a fantasy. Um, so the fact that I very much owe my what I can write in fiction today from my experiences doing journalism. Um, and journalism just uses different muscles. It allows you to think about things in real time. What is this person really like? This is a real living, breathing person. You can't just make a character out of them. They're going to tell you things and they're going to act in certain ways and they're going to have different experiences that you would never have thought of. So they're kind of, they help fuel my imagination, is the way I look at it.
It's funny you mention the thing about celebrities. The people I've enjoyed meeting the most are actually the people behind the scenes, the
Yeah.
special effects artists, makeup artists. Those guys are just amazing.
Oh, yeah. Costume designers are really fascinating. And I am not like a fashion person, but I love talking to they call them below the line in the
Ooh.
entertainment industry. That has to do with how contracts are created, and I should know the very specifics on this, but there's like above the line, which are actors. Sometimes I think directors technically go in the above the line, but those people are sort of above the line of some contract. And then the below the line people are all the gaffers, the best boys, the lighting people, the costumers, the production designers, all those people who sort of make everything work. They're the ones who go by in very tiny script at the end of the film,
Mhm.
primarily. Um, but
Oh.
what I have learned over the years is just how much those folks control what you end up seeing on screen.
Hmm.
You don't think about how the color of a room influences the scene or what the person is wearing. Like, yes, we can tell, oh, that's very period appropriate, but there's a reason why it's a certain color, or it's a reason why it does this with the actor's body. Um, and if you, one thing I mentioned in Tune In Tomorrow, for example, is when they have we all know what a script looks like, right? It's a bunch of pages and you've got to memorize it for each show. Well, it's hard to memorize 60 pages every day. So what often happens is actors get what's called sides, which is a small version, like about that big, typed out of just the scene that they're going to be working in, or just the pages they're going to work on that day. And so they will have them as a quick reference. And what happens is they often will open like a drawer on the set, and they'll put them in the drawer, and then they do the scene. But if they know where the sides are, just in case they need to find them. And I love that idea that when you're watching this created scene, this three wall set, there's all the actors are here, but everybody with the cameras is back here who you don't see. But there's also these other little hidden Easter eggs all over the set. And I only really learned about that kind of stuff by talking to the people who do work behind the scenes. Um, and I just have a great time just finding out how their minds work, and how they color code things, and how they layer things in that just become very subconscious for us, the viewer. And then once you know that they exist, it almost changes the way you see the film sometimes.
Well, okay, I want to ask sort of a fun question at this point.
These have all been fun questions. What are you
Well,
saying?
okay, fair enough. Fair enough. We're having a good time. We'll just continue with the fun. I'll put it that way then. Um, what character from one of your fiction books would you most like to be?
Hmm.
Are you sideways asking her if she has a self-insert character?
Oh, there's no implication in the
Are you
question.
accusing our guest of being a Mary Sue?
I am not.
Okay, okay. Just wanted to confirm.
I think that there's a little bit of every author in most of their characters, right? Like, I mean, you put a little bit of yourself in there. I will sometimes have images of like, okay, this is something that I definitely thought at one point, but it also fits with the character. So I'm not Mary suing the whole thing. I'm not trying to self insert myself, but there's certainly aspects of me that are in many of the characters. Star in Tune In Tomorrow is this her she wants to be an actor, but she had some of the same struggles getting to the acting job that I had with trying to get hired at a magazine. She was doing she's working at a diner, she's in her late 20s, she's doing stuff on the side, she's doing improv classes, but it's not until somebody from the Tune In Tomorrow show sees her that they say, oh, yes, she's perfect for what we are doing.
Mhm.
Um, and at one point, one of the creators of the show says to her, you are going to be such a great performer on our show. And she says, that's not the same as saying I'm a great actor. And they're like, well, you can't have everything. Um, so that, yeah, so that journey, that frustration of wanting to do something that you will be good at once you get in the door, but also finding yourself aging as you're doing it,
Mhm.
that is very much a mirror to my experience. So there's little bits of me, but I think the question really was more, who would you like to be? So who's
Yeah,
Right,
maybe more of an
right,
yeah,
right.
aspirational character?
right.
And in that case, I just have favorite characters that I love for various reasons. Um, and in the upcoming book, Leave No Trace, one of our main characters is actually a young woman who, for various reasons, her father brought her and her brother out of like the civilized world to live in the forest, and she grew up in the forest like from the time she was 8. And I started writing that book so long ago that I started reading all of these kind of books about how to survive in the woods and how to, what it was like if you are stranded somewhere. And um, I don't know that I would want to have grown up in the woods because, if nothing else, bugs really like me. Um, but I love her independence and the way that she knows all this survival skills and how to
Hmm.
move around in a very foreign world to a lot of people. So Lexi is a construct that I created when I was quite young. I was still like a teenager, but there's parts of me that have. I feel like we've sort of grown up together in a way. Like some of the things that I wanted her to be interested in, I am interested in. So that, I guess that's, I don't know if that's quite aspirational, but I love her, and I love her life, the way she leads it.
Well, I have a follow up question. Talking about Mary Sue's and self inserts, we all bring a little bit of ourselves to every role we fulfill.
Mhm.
For me, that's, my mundane job, the podcast, our other creative endeavors. When, in your opinion, as a professional, does someone cross the line of just bringing their experience and worldview to a work, to being a Mary Sue? Where can that line be drawn? Because a lot of times works get criticism that I
Mhm.
think is a little unfair for that.
My impression with the whole Mary Sue business is I don't care or mind so much if an author uses themselves in a story or their own experience in a story. I think where you start to trip into a bad area is when that character is too good to be true. They're 22 years old and they've got a doctorate and they're a lawyer and they can do CPR, and and they're just such nice people, and every time they come into a room, everybody loves them instantly. Some version of that is a problem, because that, I think, is where the first idea of Mary Sue became a problem, is that not only is it an author insert, it's the author as God in the story, and you are already God because you're writing the story. But there's no need to put yourself literally in there. And also, that's boring. If you have a character who everybody loves instantly, who can do anything and needs no assistance, there's no obstacles to overcome. You always have to put obstacles out. The phrase I have heard many times is put your main character in the place they least want to be,
Mm.
because that will provide obstacles and challenges and show you their character and how they overcome things. And that's what makes an interesting story. But I've read fan fiction in the past. I've edited it too. And, there's some really good stories in fan fiction. I'm not in any way disparaging it, but quite a lot of the time you get a character who is just too good to be true. And you commit one of the worst sins of writing, which is to be boring.
Mm.
An actual Mary Sue character is very boring.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's how I take it.
I like that. I
Yeah.
like that definition. If you have a character that's interesting, it's not a Mary Sue. If you have a character that's boring because they're great at everything, then it is a Mary Sue. Pretty simple.
Yeah.
Yep.
Uh, um, well, let's talk a little bit about advice.
Yeah, advice.
Because I'm sure you've received advice, and I'm sure that you have advice that you could give people listening or watching right now. So
Mhm.
let's start with best piece of advice that you have ever received.
Let's see. So the best piece of advice I've ever received is from an author whose name we no longer really talk about. So I will leave the crediting out of this, but I want to let everybody know this is not original from my own brain. But the best piece of advice I got was really, if somebody tells you what's wrong with your story, they're right. If they tell you how to fix it, they're wrong. And that's not to be an absolute in all ways, but the way I have interpreted that for myself is when I show my story to multiple beta readers, just to get feedback. If multiple people tell me this one thing is a problem or these two things are a problem, that's a sign that it probably is a problem. If
Mhm.
one person out of left field comes and says, this is a problem for me, but nobody ever says that, nobody else says that, that's really up to me to decide if it's something I need to fix. But since it passes muster with the majority, it's probably not something I have to adjust. That's a them problem as opposed to a me problem.
Mhm.
So that's kind of how I've interpreted it. That's why I like to show my work to as many people as I can early on, just to get sort of that focus group, right? You want the focus group to get back to you, and you always have the choice to make the fix or not make the fix. But when people tell you something is wrong with the book, it doesn't mean it is objectively 100% wrong. It just means it's wrong for them. And if enough people tell you that, that is probably a flaw in the book.
Mhm.
And as a writer, you need those people. This is true for anything you want to do creatively. You need people who can tell you, when you're wrong. Only your friends will tell you if you have something stuck in your teeth, right? Like, so you need something
Right.
that is the equivalent of this is a good story, but this is where you have something stuck in your teeth. I
Mhm.
always feel bad for people who go on American Idol and are just horrible, horrible singers and just get made fun of and they become the butt of a joke. I don't blame them because they really believe in themselves. I blame their friends who let them
Mhm.
go on this show. They clearly
Yeah.
don't have enough people around them to say, look, it's great that you want to do this. Let's do karaoke, as opposed to putting yourself on national television to be laughed at. So the way
Right.
I look at it is you want to show it to people who will tell you when it's the equivalent of something stuck in your teeth so that you can fix or not fix, but at least get it to a better place.
Yes, I would definitely agree with that 100%. And so does that sort of go along with the, I guess, because you sort of answered both on that, the best piece of advice that you've gotten, but is that also sort of the best piece of advice that you could give, or what would you say would be the best piece of
Yeah,
advice you could give?
I guess the best piece of advice I can give is write for yourself. Write the story that you would want to read, regardless of where it goes from there on, because there's a really big possibility that it's no one outside your immediate circle is ever going to see it. That's just how the business works. It's not whether you're a lot of it has nothing to do with whether you're good or persistent or talented. A lot of it is luck, a lot of it is networking, a lot of it is being in the right place at the right time. All of those things have very little to do with talent. So you should write because you want to write, not because you're expecting to make $1 million off of it or because you're hoping that this changes the world or whatever. It's a story that you feel you need to tell and that hopefully other people will also want to hear. Um, so that is really what I would say is if you want to write, you should totally write. And how do you get better at anything? You do it over and over and you get feedback and you sharpen it up and you get better. But getting it out there and getting it published is such a long shot and it can take many, many years. This is not a 6-month project. And that's one
Mhm.
of the reasons I think a lot of people fall away from it. I don't know if there's any profession where more people, other than where other, I don't know if there's any profession where, other than writing, where people will regularly come up to you and be like, I always wanted to be a writer.
Mm.
And heart
Yeah.
surgeons don't get this. I always wanted to be a heart surgeon. That doesn't happen. But everybody feels like they got a story and they want to write. And they probably can sit down for an evening and put something on a piece of paper. But doing it over and over and over again is where you get better, the story gets better, and you have a chance at making it more than just your words on a piece of paper. Tune In Tomorrow has 11 um, drafts. And of course, there's a lot of little things in between that, but that book is like 120,000 words. So you're looking at
Wow.
the equivalent of a million words
Wow.
before it got to print. And not every book will have 11 drafts,
Right.
and not every word is rewritten 11 times, but it means that it's not done after first draft. It's not done after the second, probably, or even third or fourth draft. And you have to be willing to be committed to do what needs to be done if you want to get it out there.
Yeah, well, you can't sell the book that's not written.
That is absolutely true also.
uh, well,
Unless you're Stephen King.
no.
Yeah, exactly. It's true. Writers actually do get contracts all the time for books that have not been written, but are promised to be written. But yeah, if you don't turn in that book, it ain't going to get out there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that would cost you some money if you didn't
Right.
produce what you contracted to.
Right.
Yeah, that might cost some money, not to mention your reputation.
Yes.
Um, so, um, well, we're kind of starting to close up here. But tell us where people can find out more about you and your books and articles, the different articles. Is it all together in one convenient place?
It is in one handy dandy location.
Woohoo!
So if you see my name on the screen, Randee Dawn, if you go to randeedawn.com, pretty much everything is there. I put up a lot of almost a lot of the articles that I write have a section called articles. There's a section for my books, and every book that I've had a short story in, or novel, or whatever, they're all listed individually, and you can see links to go buy them. I do a blog every so often, and I have a reading series that is also mentioned underneath bonus on there. The reading series is something we do in Brooklyn once a month. We just had a reading last night. Um, so, everything that you probably need to know is up there. There's links to my social media as well. But in most social media situations, I'm either Randee or Randee Dawn. So you will find me that way.
Cool.
Awesome. Awesome.
Because we would love for everybody to find out more about you and all your wonderful works.
And
We
we'll
would love
get
that
that in the
too.
show. Oh, sorry.
No, you were going to say? I'm sorry.
I was going to say, we'll get that in the show notes.
That would be great. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Um, so tell us what's next for you.
What is next for me? Well, I am currently doing edits on We Interrupt This Program, which is the
Mhm.
book that will be out in the fall. I am promoting The Only Song Worth Singing. I am here. And then Leave No Trace will start getting the ramp up pretty soon. And then when I've got the notes back for We Interrupt This Program, I'm about halfway through next book in the Tune In Tomorrow universe, which is supposed to be out in 2026. And that book is so far is tentatively titled Don't Touch That Dial. So funny books about
Like
fae
it.
and mythical television. I've got them coming your way.
I like it.
All right, Randee, before we go, give us the pitch for your next book. Imagine we were coming up to you at a convention and you
Uh-huh.
were trying to sell us on your next book.
So are we counting the next book as Leave No Trace?
It can be whatever you want it to be.
Well, Leave No Trace is the next book that's coming out. It's coming out in August, and it is available for pre-order now. I mentioned earlier about Lexi. There's a lot going on in the book, and I'm still working on my actual short pitch. But the pitch I have right now is that so we have Lexi, a young woman who has now turned 17, and has grown up in this woods. She's become friends with the Green Man of the Forest, who is a mythical creature out of Scottish folklore, the Gilly Dhu. And the Gilly Dhu has shown her how to use her own abilities to weave magic in her own way. But what comes into all of this is a songwriter and her best friend slash foster brother and their manager. And he's kind of like a Justin Bieber-y type who's trying to escape from the fans. And she's like his best friend slash foster sister. And then they have this manager, and they come into the woods, and he has this idea that he wants to shoot a bear. He wants to be Burt Reynolds in Deliverance, clearly not paying attention to the important part of Deliverance.
Beware
And
the banjos.
yeah, exactly. No banjos, but yes. And as you can imagine, things go pretty wrong pretty fast. There is a magical bear in the woods. There is a war between humans and fae that's going on in the background, and it all kind of comes together in Leave No Trace. So,
That sounds awesome. That
thank
really
you.
does. That really does. You piqued my interest for sure. Um,
Sounds like you've got another book to review.
I know. It always sounds like I have another book to read.
No. Review.
This is
Oh,
this
yes.
is true.
If you
This
get
is
the book,
true.
please review the book.
Well,
This
I'm
is
going well, so I'm actually getting ready to retire.
okay.
And once I do retire, I will be starting my own YouTube channel in which I do actually do book reviews.
Okay.
So this is the plan, and it is tentatively titled The Halfling's Book Nook.
Nice.
But so this is in the works, and yes, because I do love to read. I actually thoroughly enjoy reading.
She is a
And
reading
if I could just sit around all day and do nothing but consume books,
Mhm.
I would do it.
Same here.
You
Same
know,
here. Well,
But
congratulations on the upcoming retirement.
oh, well, thank
That's a
you
big
very
deal.
much. Appreciate that. Uh, well, and thank you so much for joining us today. It has been such fun and a real pleasure getting to talk to you and getting to know you, and about your journey. It's been an absolute hoot. We have thoroughly enjoyed it, and we appreciate again you taking the time and your patience. Obviously, at the beginning with the never ending technical issues.
one
No,
one
it's my pleasure.
one day the spaceman will get it all figured out.
uh,
That's right. That's right. There's got to tinker around with all the science.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And we want to thank our listeners and viewers for tuning in today. And we hope that you've enjoyed and perhaps become inspired by today's guest, Randee Dawn. And we want to give you all a huge thank you and shout out for joining us once again. And this is the Spaceman for the Halfling and the Spaceman podcast. Over and out.